are French fried potatoes and potato chips and souffled potatoes in a potato basket. We're doing a French fried free-for-all, and let the chips fall where they may. Today, on the French Chef.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. You know, the French call French fried potatoes les frites, and they love them just as much as we do. Here's a French postcard showing steak and French fried potatoes and the Eiffel Tower. And what we have here, which the French call what we call regular French fried potatoes, these are les frites, so I'm going to call them les frites. And here are potato chips, les pommes chips. And here are souffled potatoes in a potato basket. And we're going to do all four of these, and we're going to start in with the souffled potatoes because they take the longest and they're the trickiest. And here is a souffled potato. And it starts out almost as thin as a potato chip, but when you break it open, there it is. It's just empty. It's air. It's a little souffle. And they're quite tricky to do. They taste very good because they need two fryings, and you have to cut them in a very special way. And I've done quite a bit of research on how to do them, and nobody agrees on anything. And I don't know what I agree on myself, because potatoes are very strange animals. And who knows, you never know how they're going to change. But they have to be cut in a very special way. And I'm using Idaho baking potatoes. And you have to cut them into a rectangle. And everything has to be very even. That's the first rule to remember. Now I'm cutting off the ends, all four sides of them and the two ends into a rectangle. That should need a little bit more. Now you see that's a pretty good rectangle. I'm leaving the peel on so that you can see a little better what I'm doing. And now I'm taking off that peel. And then after you have your rectangle, you usually blunt off the corners. And then you save all the debris, and you can make soup out of it, or you can use that for making your potato basket. So there's your profile now of what you're aiming at. And then you want to cut it lengthwise, and it's important that they're lengthwise rather than crosswise into even 1/8 inch slices, and this seems to be very important. If you have a big knife and you're a good cutter, you can make them very even. If you happen to have one of these things called a mandolin, which has all kinds of gadgets and wheels and whatnot on it, but the main thing is it has a little slicing knife, and it slices just like that, and then you take your ruler, put on your glasses, and measure that potato, which should be 1/8 inch. This ruler didn't get in some hot fat. It got on next to the stove. That one I can see is a little too thick, so I'm going to slice that down. And souffled potatoes are not mass. At least I don't think that they're for mass cooking. You usually serve only 2 or 3 per person. There's one there that needs evening. Now that's not going to work. You can't be greedy. See, that is not even, so you just can't use it. You serve 2 or 3 per person, and they have to be, the reason they have to be even is that they just don't work if they aren't. Now I'm going to do these just not washing them at all, just drying them off in a towel. But there are a great many theories. There's some people who soak them for 2 hours in ice water, and some people who use old floury potatoes, and so on and so forth. So I have two groups. I have some that have been soaked and some that have been not. And I'm going to put them both into the pan. The ones that have been soaked haven't got blunted ends, and the ones that have been soaked have. These are the ones that have just been dried. And we'll see if there any difference. And this is the first frying. There's another one that has been soaked. And a final one that has not been soaked. So we're going to see which does what. Now the first frying, the object of this is simply to soften the potato. And that takes about 5 or 6 minutes in 285-degree fat. So while that's soaking, I'm going to do potato chips. And here they are, lovely brown little thin things. And these are just potatoes that are very thinly sliced. And I think the grater does as good a job as anything, the slicing end on that. And I'm going to slice them the long way, just because I think it's more fun. You slice up a whole potato. I have some ready sliced ones. And these get washed and then drained and dried off. Now I'm looking at these souffled potatoes again. As you notice now, they have risen slowly to the surface, which is just what they're supposed to do. And you want to keep your eye on them and be sure that they aren't touching each other too much. Now here are the potato chips, which are now going to be dried off. You have to have loads of towels in this kind of business, because I don't think you would probably be doing all of this amount of potatoes at once, but I think as long as we're doing anything, we might as well show you the works. Now, as you notice, the reason that this fat is not too hot is that they are supposed to cook through and soften and then form a little skin on top, but they're not to harden. There. Now, the potato chips are ready, and now we're going to do some les frites, or what we usually call French fried potatoes. And with these, again, if you're going to make them nice, cut your potato into a rectangle. Again, just as though you were doing les pommes frites. And you can save all of these leftovers to make one of those beautiful leek and potato soups. And then cut them into 3/8 inch slices. I don't like them too thick. For one thing, they take too long to cook, and for another thing, they usually aren't very crisp. So I usually like to do them by hand. And then these you want also to wash off. And you can, of course, there are French fried potato cutters. And here are some. There's some, you put the potato down and go, "Erf!" And then you have the problem of trying to get the potato out of the cutter. And you have the same thing with this cutter here. That you can't, I think it's sort of hard to get out of the cutter also. Well, I think the knife is much easier than that. So the reason that you want to wash off the potatoes is when they go into the fat that they won't stick together. And also with all of these potatoes, you can't fry a great many at once, really just a handful or so. If you try and fry a whole lot of them, they take too long to cook, they'll be soggy, and they just aren't going to do what you would hope. And these again get dried off. And if you want to cut them ahead, just cut them ahead and let them sit in cold water. But like the pomme souffle, the French fries have 2 fryings, and you can do the first frying ahead, as you will see. So I think it's really better to wash them and drain them, and then do the first frying. Now I'm going to go back to the souffle. And what is to happen here is that these potatoes begin to blister a little bit. And when they've blistered enough, and when there's also a little change around the edges of the potatoes, then they're supposed to puff. But if you hurry it up, they're not going to puff. And now look at this. Here's one that has already puffed. So, but it's also his split. But that goes into the water. That was one that was not. That was not the water. This is 400-degree fat. I don't know what I'm talking about here. But these also you can do ahead. And you just let them puff quickly. And then out it comes. And then you can fry them again later. Hey, two of these have already popped. Look at that. Look at that. They're supposed to pop right away. We're just being very lucky. And it doesn't seem to have made any difference whether they've been soaked or not soaked. That's gone up too. We're being very lucky today. Woo-woo. No, that didn't do it. That did it. Isn't that fun? Now, what makes them? Whoever discovered it? It was supposed to have been discovered on the train from Dieppe to somewhere. And I mean, there are all kinds of stories. Now, what you can do after they've popped up, you can take them out. This is your preliminary blanching. Take them out, and they can sit for several hours, or even, I did some, as a matter of fact, I did some 3 or 4 days ago and put them in the refrigerator. And I thought, heavens, nothing will happen to them. And it just turned out that they all re-puffed again. So in other words, you can do them ahead. Here was one. This one didn't puff. I think I'll put that back in. No. Oh, it did again. Now, isn't that funny? So maybe, well, as I said to you, it's a very strange kind of a thing. And you don't know, maybe some days the potatoes are colder than others, and why they work sometimes and why they work others, I don't know. But don't be discouraged if you're going to have them for a party. Try them out before you're going to serve them, and try out, see if they don't work unsoaked, try soaking them, and try several things. But I've found that baking potatoes seem to work the best, but other people use other kinds. So now to the French fries, les frites, and to the potato chips. Now the French fries, they have two fryings. They have the first one on low heat. Well, it's not really low, it's 300 degrees, fat. And this again, this is just to cook them through. Also called a blanching. And then they get a second frying at 400. And so if you're going to do this kind of frying of these things, this is deep, really deep fat frying, be sure that you have a basket. If the potatoes don't bubble up very much in heat at 330 like this, but if you put them into very high heat and they were wet, you could have a real bubbling up. And this is a very good fryer which has a thermostatic setting. Now we're going to do the potato chips. And I'm going to set them in the basket. And these, if you haven't dried them off well, these can really bubble up something fierce. And I have a lot of fat in here because I'm also going to do a potato nest. And this is very hot. This is 400 degrees. Now watch this bubble up. Yee! But you be careful. Lift the basket up. See, that's dangerous, that bubbling. But as soon as you lift up the basket, the bubbling stops. And just remember that what I'm using here is peanut oil, which I like very much. I think Some of the other oils really have such an awful smell, but the peanut oil seems to have the least. But remember, when you're deep fat frying, you're into some very dangerous business. And you can get terrible fat fires, like when they used to burn people in oil. That's just what happens if you aren't very careful. And I think in any well-equipped kitchen, you should have a fire extinguisher. And this isn't funny, because a fat fire can happen very easily. We called up the fire department, and they said absolutely the best kind is called dry chemical. And that puts out kitchen fires. And have that right near you. And if by any chance you run out of it, just plain baking soda. Baking soda is part of the ingredients in the dry chemical things. But don't allow kiddies to run around in the kitchen and a lot of kooks and nuts, because it's so dangerous. And don't, for instance, don't have handles sticking out that you yourself might brush by and then dump over all the fat onto your feet. That would be the end of your feet. So just remember that you're doing something dangerous, but it's worthwhile because they're so good. I'm shaking them up every now and then. One thing, too, there's a great difference between home frying and restaurant or cafe frying, because in restaurants you have 220 electrical heat or big gas stoves. While at home you just have 120 current and a small amount of fat, and the fat keeps cooling off. And although a lot of recipes say 375, these need a little bit longer. I'm going to take out some of the ones that aren't done. These ideally you would let go a little tiny bit longer than this. But I don't know, they're pretty nice. So out they go. And then you want to salt them. And then the sooner you eat them, the better. They're absolutely delicious. And I like them with quite a dark brown. And just taste one. No. There's all the difference in the world between your own home fries in fresh new oil and the kind that you get in a dirty dog wagon. So now, back to the French fries, les frites, which are here. And these fry just, eek, ow. Now see, that's a dangerous thing to have. Oh, I'm going to get that out here. See, I was just jiggling around, not paying attention to what I was doing. And I lost the handle off that basket. Well, I'll dump it out because we're through with it. Now, this first frying is just until the potato is soft. So cut it and feel it, and it seeds to your pressure. And then it has to drain for 5 minutes. And now, while that's draining and cooling off, we're going to do this darling little potato basket, this one. And for this you have grated potatoes or the debris of other potatoes. And you just grate them or cut them very, very fine and squeeze them out and dry them off. And then what we're making here is a nest that's all brown and nice. That one is somewhat the worse for wear. And you make them in a special basket. Or you could use 2 twin sieves. I've never been very terribly successful with twin sieves. These you have to get in an import house. And I think it's a good idea to oil them up first in some hot oil. And then the nest, as you can see, fits in the basket, and then it has the cover on top. So you put the grated or very finely chopped potatoes into the basket, You don't want it too thick. And then the top goes on, and there's some little clips. Now here are twin sieves, but these are twin sieves that you could use, but I think you'd have to have an enormous amount of fat to bring it off. I think probably you're better off having the real thing. But these you'll just have to find one of those gourmet shops who imports what they call bird's nest potato baskets. And then this is now ready to go into its very hot fat. And again, now you're going to watch what's going to happen to this because you never can drain them very well. And you have to have lots of fat. So, look at that. You can see how terribly dangerous that is, but if you keep, as soon as you lift the basket out, the bubbling stops, and you keep carefully dipping it, standing well away, until it begins stop bubbling. The bubbling is caused by the moisture in the potatoes. And as soon as you cook the moisture out, then you gradually stop the bubbling. With this, you notice I have my fryers on some, yes, I think that's almost all right, on some trays in case there's any fat that comes out. There, that seems all right. Another frying medium beside oil, which is very nice, gives a good color and a good flavor, and I think is less offensive in smell, is a combination of lard and beef suet. And if you have a market that sells pig's feet and tripe and nice kind of gutsy food like that, they probably also sell beef suet. And you just buy it by the pound and you cut it up into small pieces and put it in a pot with a little bit of water and just let it steam very, very, very slowly. And all the fat renders itself out. And then you combine that half and half with lard and you have a delicious frying medium. That was a clip that just came off there. This takes about 2.5 to 3 minutes. And you can tell, if you notice this bubbling, it's still bubbling, and it's through when the bubbles have about stopped. I'm going to get ready for it now. Well, they have just about stopped. I'll move these French fries over. I'm going to conclude that that is fried enough. And you drain it out. And then you notice there are little bits of potato hairs sticking out, and these you knock off with a spoon. Because if you don't, you're not going to be able to unmold it. And then you have to let it cool for about 2 minutes. So scrape them out both inside and out. And then just let it drain. And now we have the final frying of the French fries. And that's going to go into 400-degree fat. Now, oh, here they are. Oh, thank heaven. This basket is all right. Of course, you don't need 2 baskets, 2 fryers the way I do. I just have it so that you wouldn't have to wait around. Certainly with the French fries, after you've taken them out from their first fry, then you reheat your frying medium up to 400 degrees. And you can tell when the French fries are done, also when the bubbling is stopped, which means that the humidity has boiled out of them. And this is what gives you a lovely crisp potato. Now, meanwhile, as they say in the continued stories, we're going to finish with the pomme souffle. Now these have, here. Now these are ones that had puffed up. And now they're supposed to puff right back up again when you put them into the fat. That's too big. There, that was already puffed. Yep, there they are. They are puffing up again. And these you cook for a minute or two until they're nice and brown and crisp. I would put in some that are a little browner and crisper so that you get the idea. And then they come out, and as soon as they're out, as soon as they're done, you then salt them and serve them. What's interesting always with the, I've got to check those. Now I'm looking at my French fried potatoes, but they're perfectly all right because they're still bubbling. Now, I think 2 minutes are up, and I ought to be able to unmold my nest here. I'll put these over here. Now, here we have our potato nest. And there the clips are off. And I have to be very careful with this because it's delicate. Now, presumably, if it's cooled enough, out it will come. Just poke it a little bit. Have to be there. Good. Doesn't always. So there you are. The French fries, I think, are just about done. So I'll put the nest on the platter, and there are the French fries. And they're about done just about when they stop bubbling. And out they come, and they get salted too. And then after this second frying, I think, eat them right away. Let them drain a little bit, sort of shake them around. And then they're salted and they're ready to eat. And they're absolutely lovely. I think you forget how good really home-fried things are. And then here are little pomme souffle. And their little potato nest. And isn't that fun? And these lovely little chips. But I think you find that with all of them, the sooner you eat them, the better, because they have that lovely, crisp, fresh taste. And remember, as soon as they're fried and out, put the salt on them, because if you wait too much to salt them, they don't absorb it and get quite the right taste. And that's all for our French fried free-for-all today on The French Chef. And this is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
The French Chef has been made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation. Julia Child is co-author of Mastering the Art of French Cooking, Volumes 1 and 2.